Welcome to Stanley, Scuba, Sailing, and Adventures. I started diving as a teenager and eventually decided to become a dive master. I started sailing as a young man and took many classes with the American Sailing Association and completed an offshore passage of over 1,000 miles nonstop. I love exploring and believe that life is an adventure. It is what you make it. I appreciate you joining me. Please hit that subscribe button. Enjoy. Scuba diving, Nassau Bahamas, dive site, the Ridge and Sea Viking wreck. I just happened to be the first one in the water and saw a reef shark below as I made my descent. This was a morning dive, May 18th. Started about 10 a.m. and lasted almost 55 minutes. I'm always excited to see reef sharks, and there's usually a good opportunity here in the Bahamas. This video was shot over the course of a single dive on this dive site. I don't recall ever being at this dive site in the past, but I can't be certain. I'd have to search the archives. The sharks seemed very active this morning. There were several nurse sharks and several reef sharks. They were making close passes. The top of this reef is at about 40 feet, and the sun is extremely bright. You can tell by the video. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I had some great photo opportunities from the passes the sharks were making, but the sun was difficult to work with. As I would turn to try to keep the sharks in frame, the sunlight angle would change. The average depth on this dive was about 45 feet with a max depth of somewhere near 65 feet. The water was a comfortable 84 degrees Fahrenheit. I spent the first half of the dive enjoying these sharks on what they call the Ridge, which is really a reef with a wall on the other side. I didn't explore the wall very much. The Sea Viking wreck is very close to this reef, maybe 25 yards is the best guesstimate I have, and it was a little deeper over there by the wreck. The Sea Viking appears to be some sort of old sport fishing boat, not very large, but interesting. There's quite a bit of growth, as you'll see on the Sea Viking. It's not a very large wreck, so our dive group kind of overwhelmed it, and I didn't get close to the wreck. I just went around the perimeter. My favorite part of the dive site, of course, was the sharks. Near the end of the dive, I left the wreck and decided to look for the sharks again. Saw them a couple more times, which you'll see towards the end of the video, and then I spent a little time on the reef. I really enjoyed this dive site, and unusual for me, I was the first one in the water and the last one out. can't ask for much more than this. Great visibility, lots of sharks, coral reef, a wreck, lots of sunshine. Great dive site, great dive day. I saw this decent-sized crab out for a stroll on my way over to the wreck. He didn't seem interested in a close-up. Here's a view of the Sea Viking wreck from the bow. As I mentioned, it's an older fishing boat. Here with some of the other divers in view, you can get a perspective on the size of the wreck. Here we are making our way down the port side of the vessel. As I said, and you can see here, the wreck isn't extremely large, so it's easily overwhelmed by a small group of divers. Here we are nearing the stern of the vessel. Lots of growth here. Great looking wreck. I would guess by looking at the growth and the amount of deterioration on the metal that this boat's been down here since probably the late 90s. That's just a wild guess. I really have no idea and didn't do any research on this particular vessel. It's my understanding that most of the wrecks that Stuart Cove takes dive charters to are artificial wrecks or artificial reefs. In other words, boats that were intentionally scuttled. Here I'm continuing to make my way up the starboard side of the vessel and back to the bow. If I weren't so anxious to look for the sharks again, I may have waited until the other divers had moved on and looked around inside the wheelhouse of this wreck. As it was, I wanted to see the sharks again. Unfortunately, I didn't have my signaling device with me, the one I had used in Belize, which seemed to stimulate the reef sharks. At this point, I was really wishing I did have it with me. I'd like to see if these sharks reacted the same. Someone suggested that perhaps my signaling device might sound like a spear hitting the rock from when someone spearfishes, and perhaps that's why the sharks were stimulated by it. That's an interesting hypothesis, so I wonder if the sharks would only be stimulated in an area where there was a great deal of spearfishing going on. Anyway, I guess that'll have to be another test for another day. In the meantime, these sharks were close enough for some great pictures and video. There were, of course, other fish to see on the reef, like this grouper. Very near the end of the dive, I found this school of dog snappers and yellowtail snappers. I did my best to join the school. They seemed a little apprehensive, but I got pretty close. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.